Who's that knocking at your door? Who's peeking through your window? And who the heck is scratching on the walls? Welcome back to the swamp, my friends. Today we're going to be sharing some creepy, allegedly true stories sent in by viewers just like you. These stories are a little different from what I would normally cover on the channel. Normally, I would cover something a little bit more natural or supernatural, but these stories all revolve around the creepiest thing on the planet: human beings. They're so unpredictable, so malicious, and sometimes so heartless. If you have a story that you would like to share in a future video, whether it be a creepy story with a person or maybe even a cryptid, be sure to submit it at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. Now, without further ado, let's get into these creepy stories that'll keep you up tonight. I should mention that I previously lived in a tiny town, but went to high school in a considerably larger city. I never had a reason or the nerve to go out into the city on my own, so when my two friends wanted to hang out around town, I was nervous, to say the least. However, I thought, what the hell, I'll be with them. We had a blast for a couple of hours after school, with some small scary incidents along the way, including walking through a store full of expensive statues and gemstones with a massive backpack protruding from my back, and the original restaurant we wanted to go to was closed, forcing us to Subway. However, as it got dark, we all knew we had to go home, so I told my mother where to find me, but she's hopeless with directions, so I had expected to be hanging around for a while. I noticed a new camera stationed outside of the store, which made me feel a little bit safer. But about 10 minutes into the wait, I was approached by two men. My memory is a bit fuzzy due to how freaked out I was, but this is what I can remember. Hey, do you know where a name of a town that I can't remember is? I shook my head. I was already nervous because I'm a paranoid person on the best of days, and this was not turning out to be the best of days. Come on, one man coaxed. Listen, we'll give you a bag of jewelry if you help us, the other man said. Now, I was genuinely freaking out. I glanced around and noticed the new camera, and stepped a little closer to the line of sight of the lens. Listen, I stammered, trying really hard not to stammer or show how freaked out I was. I think it's that way, and I don't need anything, I said, pointing in a random direction. They glanced in that direction of my finger. They glanced back. Can you show us? Again, we have a bag of jewelry. It felt as if my heart leaped into my throat. No thank you. My mom is coming to get me very soon. I declined as calmly as I could. They stared at me for a few seconds, then nodded, thanking me and heading off in the direction I pointed. I kept well in the line of sight of the camera until my mother picked me up. I didn't fully relax for probably a full week. I have absolutely no idea why they were so eager to give me that bag of jewelry, or even if that bag of jewelry even existed. My first thought was that they stole it and wanted to throw the police off their trail by handing some of it off to me. The second thought was that they were trying to lure me away. Either way, it wouldn't have ended well for me if that was their goal. No one believed me when I told them, but I didn't expect them to. I have never really felt comfortable in the city, alone, in the dark, ever since. Even though it's been 2 years and I now live in a much bigger area, which is supposed to be safer, I still just don't feel safe. I'm a little nervous to share this story because I've never shared it with anyone before, not even my family. Anyway, I'm a girl and I live in Centennial, Colorado, and a few years ago, my family would often go skiing during wintertime. We don't anymore, sadly. My parents are just too old. But I was about 11 years old at the time, and we went skiing in a very popular area. I decided that I was going to go off on my own, and my family agreed to meet me at the bottom for lunch a little bit later that day. After skiing for a while on my own, I figured I had enough time to ride the lift and ski down one last time before I met my family. I rode the lift myself, and when I made it to the top, I realized there was absolutely no one else there, other than myself and the dude running the ski lift. This was normal for this park, especially because it was around 12 or 12:30, prime lunchtime. I skied a little bit and pulled to the side to take a breather. It was like a flat area with some trees and a steep hill on one side. The slope meant for skiing on the other side. I looked at my watch and chilled when I heard some footsteps behind me. I turned around and saw a man. A pretty average looking man, if I'm honest. Around 6'2", probably 200 pounds. He was wearing nothing but jeans and a t-shirt or a wife beater. I can't quite remember. He wasn't wearing anything to protect himself from the cold, which I thought was very odd. This was weird because this was Colorado in the winter on top of a mountain. It was at least 10 degrees or lower. We're nowhere near a lodge, a cabin, or any reason for this man to be dressed the way he was. He wasn't even wearing shoes. Anyway, he looked at me. It felt like hours that he was staring at me though, but it was probably only 10 seconds. He turns back and walks back into the woods. The cold woods. After I lose sight of him, I ski back down to the bottom of the mountain and realize I'm shaking. I'm freezing. I find my parents, and after I eat, I decide to ski again. I know it sounds stupid, but I wasn't going to let a day of skiing go to waste. But I didn't see a trace of that man ever again. Thanks for sharing my story if you end up doing so. I don't remember very much about the scoring. It happened when I was pretty young, but looking back, it may have been one of the most horrifying events of my life. We were going to visit the panda bears in Washington, D.C. They were going to be so cool. I remember our entire class looking forward to the field trip for weeks before it actually happened. The day of the field trip, I was in absolute awe. I've never actually seen panda bears in person, and I just remember being so mesmerized by everything. The first half of the day went in a way that you might imagine. Everything was fine. After about 40 minutes of looking at the panda bears, that kind of got old, and we moved on to something else. We started looking at some of the other animals, and I remember looking at all of them and wondering how these animals even existed without me knowing about it. I remember just sitting there for a really long time and just staring at these animals because I knew that it was going to be a long time before I ever got a chance to see them again. I know, I was pretty weird. We got lunch and then moved on to some more animal observing. We ended up breaking off into smaller groups. There weren't very many of us there, so there were about 5 groups of 3. I was with one of my friends and his grandfather, who was one of the nicest old men I have ever met in my entire life. He was so nice that he bought me cotton candy when I didn't have enough money myself. Anyways, back to the story. Everyone was having a really good time, but when we got into groups, my friend's grandfather was a little bit slower than everyone else, and not very observant over us kids. I'm not saying that he was negligent or anything, definitely not, but he wasn't staring at us the entire time like some of the other teachers were. And for that reason, something pretty weird happened to me. I remember standing over by the snakes and looking in and being amazed. As much as they frightened me, I knew that I wasn't in any real danger, so it was pretty cool to see them so up close. I vividly remember there being this one really long snake that had a really colorful design on it. I was staring at it when I noticed something that pulled my attention away. It was a man a few feet away from me, taking pictures. Now, there weren't many other people around, and it was weird the way his camera was angled. I assumed that he was trying to take pictures of the snakes, but for some reason, he was standing in a position where I was between him and the snakes. It was like I was getting in the way. Without really thinking about it, I moved out of the way like the polite little kid I was. I didn't want to ruin his pictures, but that was when he followed me. He kept taking pictures of me, and it was hands down one of the creepiest things that has ever happened to me. Keep in mind, this guy literally had sunglasses on and a mustache. I don't even know how he managed to get into the zoo looking like that. Well, however he did, he managed it. And he was following me around for a good while. taking pictures of me. Being a naive little kid, I didn't think anything nefarious of it. The whole concept of child predators was very foreign to me at the time. I'd never really heard anything about that due to my parents kind of sheltering me most of my life. He said in this really creepy voice, "Take a pose." And that's exactly what I did. I started acting like a model for him. Again, I didn't think anything bad of it. In fact, I was under the impression that I was going to be a supermodel. I mean, if you rule out child predators, why else would some random stranger be taking pictures of me? I remember hearing my friend's grandfather whistle for us to get back over to him, and I did. I looked at the man who had been taking my pictures, really quick before I left though. I told him that my name was Jen, and I told him that I wanted my supermodel name to be Jenny Fabulous. I ran back over to my friend's grandfather, and we started making our way to the next exhibit. I don't think he had ever really noticed the man who had been taking pictures of me. A couple of more hours went by, and we were wrapping it up for the day. We were going to see the very last thing, which was going to be the lions. We had gotten back into our class group, so all of the teachers and students were together. That was when the creepy photographer man started noticing me again. He began taking pictures of me in front of the lion exhibit, just like he had earlier. Again, I started striking some poses as you might expect. That was when one of the teachers started to get involved. She motioned for one of the teachers to take me away, while she said something in a very stern voice to that man. They were really good teachers and were looking out for my well-being, so I don't actually know what was said to the man. All I know is that we did not spend very much time looking at the lions. It was only a few minutes later that we got back onto the bus to go home. It was only years later when I was telling a friend about this story that it dawned on me. That creepy old man was probably a child predator, and he was taking pictures of me in hopes to find me again, or maybe just use them for something gross. I don't know what exactly my teachers did to that guy, but my parents found out about the situation, and now they're very protective of me. I don't know what happened to that man, but I never heard from him ever again. Before I tell you this, there's a few things you should know. My ex-wife is bipolar manic depressive type 1 and an alcoholic. I am a bi-female, 5'5", 115 pounds. She is a lesbian at 5'6", and 165 pounds. She was physically abusive. We lived on the second floor of a split house and the stairs went straight down all the way. Once she strangled me with a bath towel after one beating. She left me naked, crying and gasping for breath between pleas to not die, with a strained voice on the bathroom floor. Why stay through all that? She was a honed predator, a master manipulator. I stayed because she had me totally isolated. I stayed because I had no money to leave. I stayed for my stepson who called me mom. I stayed because I loved her. I stayed because I was scared to leave. To the event. I woke up in the middle of the night to someone thrashing around my living room. I turned to wake my then wife, but the bed was empty. My heart dropped into my stomach. I know what that means. My ex was drunk again, stumbling around making a mess. I asked her where they had been. I got a sneer. She said she went for a drive. I'm very against drinking and driving. I said, "You shouldn't drink and drive. You could have hurt someone or gotten a ticket." My ex responded by beating me until I was in front of the stairs, and by then I was covered in bleeding defensive wounds, with red welts and bruises forming that covered my arms, legs, chest, and back. The whole time she was saying vile and vulgar things. Once I was in front of the stairs, she smiled with malice and pushed me down, so hard. I didn't lose consciousness, but I guess I was whimpering from fear and pain because she ran down the stairs, fists balled. Fear gave me the speed. I crawled between her wide-set legs, up the stairs and ran up into the kitchen, desperately trying to get back to the door. I wasn't fast enough. She went out the front door and back up the back steps. She was waiting for me in the kitchen. She stared me down. I was shaking, and it hurt to breathe. A few broken ribs I found out later, but I tried to stay calm. My ex pulled a large knife from the butcher block and took a step forward, knife poised. She looked at me with the nastiest look that wakes me up in cold sweats still to this day. They said in a very monotone, slightly slurred and very aggressive voice, I am having homicidal ideations. You should call somebody." She stabbed the fridge, then the counter. Luckily, it stuck for a moment, and I sprinted to the bedroom. Normally I can't budge the dresser, but the adrenaline fueled me and I barricaded the door. I heard her walking and laughing and stabbing the walls. The cops came but couldn't find my door as it was unmarked. I had to move the dresser, which was very heavy, and I had to brave the dark hall with nothing to defend myself. I sprinted down the stairs and flagged an officer down. My ex was on the roof, knife in hand. Her note read, "I'm still going to kill her. She can't take my death. It's better. She suffers more this way." There is more, but it's bad words that I still will leave out. The cops got her down safe. I asked for leniency due to mental illness. They got charged with terroristic threats and intent to commit terror, basic assault, and simple abuse. But I guess that's better than attempted murder and attempted suicide. I have a 10-minute audio of the last argument, but it's so bad and the language is such garbage, I don't know if I can even share it on this show. Thank you so much for sharing my story and giving people an outlet. Halloween of 2019. My mother, sister-in-law, significant other, and I took the kids, my daughter and niece, out trick-or-treating. Everything went as good as planned. One house even did shots/drinks for the parents of the trick-or-treaters. It was awesome. Eventually, my significant other and sister-in-law took the kids across the street and left my mother and me to wash the stroller and wagon we had with us. We were stopped in front of this house with a large, maybe 4-foot hedge and a picnic bench in front of it. I had noticed something out of the corner of my eye and turned to see a man sitting on the bench. At first I had jumped and told my mom. We both thought it was a prop until he moved slightly. "That's creepy," I quietly said to my mom. After everyone came back, we went to the next house. My significant other and sister-in-law again took the kids up, but this time the guy was standing at the hedge that was separating the new house we were at and the yard that he was in. He was in a creepy mask, staring at them. He was making my niece and daughter scared, to the point where my sister-in-law, she's like 5 foot tall and really passive, said, "Hey, you're scaring my daughter, can you please stop?" She said this more than once walking up, and when they came back, she said, "Okay, stop, we have kids with us, and you're scaring them." We were all laughing it off a little bit, but we were still slightly annoyed. As they were going to the second part of the duplex they were at, I noticed movement behind us. I turned my head and guessed who's walking towards us. You guessed it. It was the creep. I noticed he was carrying something, so I told my mom to walk more around the corner onto the other part of the sidewalk so we can get away from him. I stood on the corner of the street and kept staring him down. That's when I noticed that whatever was in his hand was glistening off the streetlights. It didn't take long for me to realize what it was. It was a machete. I kind of panicked and told my mom to go up to the house with my significant other and sister-in-law and take the kids and tell them to call the cops and let you in. This guy started swaying the machete back and forth and coming closer. I rushed over and started to shove everyone back up the stairs while he went to the middle of the street. It was a 4-way stop. I was telling my significant other to smash on the door and ask if they can let us in to call the police, all while watching this guy. He stood there with his head facing us and swinging the machete around him. The people refused to allow even just the kids in, let alone us, even refused to tell us the intercepting streets when I called the police. They kept saying, "It's just a joke." But the way he felt the need to follow us and swinging the weapon around, hindering us from going back to my parents, we would have had to pass him to get back there, and the fact that he had fled when I was calling the police, they could not find him at all, makes me think that he had other intentions for us. Anyone who's ever worked a night shift job will tell you that it eventually gets old. I remember being really excited about starting my first night shift job. I thought it would be so cool, like the episode of SpongeBob with the hash-slinging slasher or something. It was nothing like that at all. In fact, it got painfully plain, old, and repetitive after a while. I'm a male nurse, and I had been working in a hospital nearby. It was a long commute and extremely unbearable. Once I finished my contract with the hospital, which was a year, I decided to apply for another job. One that was a little less stressful and disorganized as the hospital. I got a job at a child psychiatric unit. Working with children with mental illnesses seemed like a really cool job. Maybe cool isn't the right word, but meaningful. The hospital left me with this feeling of trying to save people who were likely going to die anyway. But with these kids, I could make a real difference that might turn their life around or find a way to let them cope with whatever is wrong with them. I was all around excited about it. The pay was even higher, which had me really excited too. The only problem was that the only shift available was night shift. The hiring manager told me that there might be a day shift position available within a couple of months, and I would be the first one to get it if it opened up, but that was about all I heard about it. So, there I was, helping kids, at night. The only problem was that they all fell asleep for the most part. The only time I got to do anything was when one of them woke up or started misbehaving. This very quickly became the most boring job I ever had. About a month went by when something moderately frightening happened. It was a night like any other. I was sitting at my desk, charting some stuff I'd done with the kids earlier that night. I heard a noise that I did not quite recognize at first. It sounded like some of the kids were wrestling or something, but on the bed. I got really anxious as I did not want to go in there to see some mentally handicapped kids having, something more than cuddling going on. Call me cynical, but that's where my mind went immediately. But when I got in there, I saw something that I don't think I can ever unsee. I turned the light on to see one of the older kids who was trying to smother another one. The kid that was doing the smothering had no previous incident of violent behavior. I didn't personally know these kids well enough because I didn't work there during the day, but I knew their cases well enough that the kid doing the smothering had bipolar disorder. It was pretty severe, but he had never had a violent outburst like this. It was just so unusual. I immediately pulled him off the other kid, and then he started fighting me. He reached around his own head and punched me in the nose at a weird angle. This kid had to have been 11 or 12 years old, and I was honestly surprised at how much force he had behind his punch. He didn't break my nose or anything, but he definitely bloodied it up. My adrenaline kicked in after that, and I was able to restrain him without a problem. I called for a nurse from another unit in the building to come over and help me. It felt like it was forever, waiting for this other nurse, but she got there within a few minutes. The entire time I was waiting though, I couldn't help but look at this little kid who had nearly murdered another kid. When the other nurse got over, we gave him some medication that would knock him out and put him to sleep. I asked the other nurse, Carla, what I was supposed to do. She was there for a few years before me, and I assumed she would have a good answer. We just did everything we can. Violent outbursts don't get kids thrown out of here. I was a little shocked. I argued with her a little, but that was that. I tried talking to the kid that was being smothered, and he didn't have a whole lot to say about it. He said that he didn't really know the other kid that well, but they never had a negative incident up until this night. This was a few years back now, and I can never forget how I nearly watched a kid die. If I had been just a few minutes late, he probably would be dead right now. It wasn't long after that experience that I started looking for another job. I got one a few weeks later and did my best to explain the situation to my case manager. She didn't seem to understand or care, but that's not my problem anymore. A year ago, I was 28, living in a condo in southern Arizona. I am a single parent and have my 3 children and a dog, a Belgian Shepherd named Loki, living in this little quiet condo. This neighborhood that we lived in was actually quite nice and friendly. My children would play outside with neighbor kids on a daily basis. I didn't really have to watch them like a hawk out there. Plus, my neighbor had his garage open every day, all day, because he built race cars for a living, and watched the kids out there too as he was building. One fall night in 2016, I was doing my usual chores. Vacuuming, cleaning the rooms, washing clothes, etc. I wanted to do as much as I could before the kids got back from their grandparents' house the next morning. I have a door in my bedroom. That is a sliding glass door, and I usually leave it halfway open, so it'll be easier for me to go back and forth from the garage where the washing machine was, and for fresh air. Loki also loved it open because it was easy to access, to run back and forth inside and outside. He's a very obedient, smart, loyal family dog. Well, I needed to throw the trash away, and when Loki saw me getting the garbage bag, he knew I was about to head out to the alley, and he likes coming with me. So I went through my room, through my sliding glass door, and opened the garage to throw away the trash in the dumpster. When I was putting the dumpster's lid back down, I turned around and saw Loki. His eyes were fixed on the roof, and he was growling. I looked up to see what he was growling at, and I didn't see anything. Just assuming it was a cat because he absolutely despised cats. So I started walking back in the garage, and usually, I didn't have to say anything to Loki, he just followed. I was about to press the button where the garage door came down and realized Loki was still out in the alley. I called for him to come, but he didn't. He didn't even look my way. He was sitting, looking up, very still as if he were hunting something. "Loki, come!" I yelled. Then suddenly he jumped up and snarled and barked viciously towards the roof. At the same time he did, I heard thumps going across my roof. "What in the heck was that?" I yelled. What scared me the most was the way Loki reacted. I've only seen him like this maybe once before, and that is when I almost got robbed when I was stationed back in Washington at the time, years earlier. I quickly shut the garage door and went inside a little rattled. Loki, still a little wind up, kept pacing back and forth crying and growling. So I texted one of my neighbors who helped me a lot if he could please come to my house. Even though it was quite late, I didn't want to call the cops quite yet. And anyway, he was just 2 houses down from me. "Les, can you please come and check around my house? I think someone's trying to get in." He happened to be up and actually called me a minute later, so I explained the situation to him. He told me to wait inside while he checked, so Les went up on the roof and checked everything up there. He didn't find anything, not so much as even trash up there. "It's probably just cats, not to worry, but if you hear anything again, call me and I'll check again." I said thank you and apologized for the inconvenience. The next couple of days go by and I heard nothing. It was all quiet, so I went on thinking I was just being paranoid. The next morning I was brushing my daughter's hair for school and heard very loud footsteps across my roof. It startled my daughter and Loki went crazy again, so I got my old military machete from under my bed and ran out to the back with Loki. Nothing. I circled around the front and there was nothing. If my neighbors saw me, they probably thought I was crazy walking around the early morning hours with a machete in my hand. So I went inside to reassure my daughter that it was probably a cat. She told me, "No, Mom, it sounds like someone was running." I told her, "It's okay, baby. It's gone now." Later that day, when I came from work, I saw police cars down the street in an ambulance. It was my neighbor Colleen. She was getting loaded up into an ambulance. Colleen was an older, very sweet lady. I walked pretty fast to the other neighbors and asked what was going on. Someone had broken into her house while she was napping, and Colleen apparently startled the assailant, and the asshole pushed a fragile neighbor to the wall, breaking her hip. The guy escaped. Colleen was there on the ground until her daughter came to check on her just a little while ago. She got worried that her mother Colleen wasn't answering the phone, and thank God she came and checked on her. I was just in awe, just trying to wrap my head around what happened. Then the police were talking to each one of us, asking if we saw or heard anything suspicious lately. Then I realized, holy crap, I knew those footsteps were on my roof. As I thought to myself, so I told the officers immediately everything that I heard and saw, and how Loki reacted. So the police set up officers to patrol our neighborhood for about a week, and nothing really happened. I had to tell my daughters what was going on. My son is still kind of young to understand, so he doesn't really understand what a bad person is. But I did my best to explain that a bad person was trying to take things from us, and he said to me, "Don't worry, Mama, I'll make you safe." So I explained to them they couldn't play out as freely as they were for a while, until things calmed down. 2 weeks passed, still a little on guard. It was late and I needed to do laundry, so I had my sliding glass door open for the fresh air, and so it'd be a bit easier for me to get in and out with loads of laundry. When I was getting my last load, I had the basket in my arms. I shut the door to the garage and was walking to my room. As I got under the porch, I took a step and then I heard a creak. For a minute, I paused and looked down, confused if I made that creak. I soon realized how stupid I was to even look down because my floor was made of concrete. Then I heard another creak. I slowly looked up and realized where it was coming from. It was coming from right above me on my porch roof. My heart sank. In my head, I was screaming profanities. I looked down because I saw movement, and out of nowhere Loki appeared, but he just sat at the doorway of my room. I very quietly motioned him, "Loki, come." At first he started wagging his tail as if we were going to play. Then Loki stepped out, and as soon as he stepped out, his fur on the back of his head raised in defense mode. Then he started growling. He then walked out from under the porch and turned. He then snarled and ran inside. As I was sliding the door closed, I yelled, "Loki, come!" in a demanding loud voice so he would listen. He came running inside. I locked the door immediately. I saw a shadowy figure jump from my roof onto the floor. My oldest daughter came in and asked what was going on, and I told her to get my phone and call 911 immediately. I told my other daughter to get her brother and barricade themselves in the bathroom. Take Loki with you, and you don't open the door for no one unless it's me or the police. They were crying and wanted me to come. "Baby, I can't go. It'll be okay. Just go." Loki was foaming at the mouth and wanting to get this guy. I absolutely was terrified, shaking. I've been to war and seen things, but when my children were in the crossfire of this horror story, this was different. When I turned back to see where he literally was right in front of me outside the glass door glaring at me. He was wearing a hooded sweater and had a crowbar in his hand. I started to remember my machete was right next to my nightstand right beside me. I didn't want him to know I had it yet. If he tried breaking in, I wanted to give him a surprise of his life. He then jiggled the handle to my door to open it. I asked him what the hell he wanted. He said, "Look, you and your kids don't have to get hurt. Let me in and let me take your TVs." I was like, "Yeah, that's not going to happen, asshole. My husband is coming home right now." He replied with a grin, "You don't have a husband." My stomach dropped. He was rattling my door and yelling, "Let me in," then hit my door with the crowbar, but it didn't shatter. My kids were yelling, crying hysterically. They opened the door and let Loki out. Loki came sprinting into the door, enraged. "I'm going to kill that freaking dog, then your kids, then you." He started hitting the door harder and harder. I ran to get my machete and yelled for him to come on. Then a glorious sight. An officer jumped the fence and told him to put his weapon down. The guy turned to the officer and the officer tased him. 4 squad cars came. I went to go get my kids. I opened the door. They were all rattled and come running towards me, giving me tight hugs. He was charged and sent to prison. My kids are still going to therapy but are getting better. I'm doing whatever I can to help my kids cope with everything. Loki is still with us and we love him very much. Loki was a big part of saving our lives as much as the cops were. I hope I never see the assailant again, and if I ever do, I don't know if I could hold back on what I would physically do to him. This happened back when I was like 11 or 12 years old. I've been thinking about it recently and decided to share it, maybe just to get it out of my head. So my mother and I, at this point, lived in a house that was in the middle of nowhere, and I mean that literally. I walked home from school most days, and to get from my school to the house, you had to walk past a long stretch of woods on both sides of the road. One day, I was walking home. My mother was still at work, when I noticed an unfamiliar truck begin to approach. There was a few houses in the area, but I had just passed them, so I thought that maybe he did too on accident, and thought nothing of it. Then it started getting closer and closer. My nonchalance towards the situation started to disappear, and I started to speed walk to put a little distance between myself and the truck. I was a scrawny kid who didn't play sports, and even if I did, I still would have been scared of the truck coming up on me in the middle of nowhere with no help in sight. It was still bright out, but all of the neighbors were behind us and nobody could have helped me. The truck suddenly came up beside me and I very nearly screamed, only barely managing not to while the truck's window was being rolled down. While the truck was still in motion, the driver stuck his head out. He was an average-looking guy in his 40s with a scraggly little beard, who would have creeped me out even if it wasn't happening like this. There was a look in his eyes that I can only describe now as a hunger. I don't remember what exactly was said, but I do recall that he said his name was Joe, and that he knew my mother, and that she'd called him to come pick me up because she wasn't comfortable with me walking. She'd never had a problem with it before, and if she had an issue, she would have brought it up earlier that day. I also didn't recognize this guy at all. I of course said no, she wouldn't have said that, and continued walking. He kept persisting that she wanted me to get in, so I wasn't walking alone, and I remember saying, "Why do you want me in the car? Can't you just follow me?" I could tell, even then, he was becoming angry. I began to walk a little faster at that point, trying to figure out what I was going to do and how I was going to get out of the situation, especially when we got to the house because the locked front door was sketchy and you had to force the key in and jiggle it in for a few minutes to get it open. I knew I was in deep trouble, but just when I could see the house coming up, Joe opened the driver's side door. At this point I started running. I didn't look back, but I started running like my whole life depended on it, which it probably did. I ran and didn't stop until I saw someone, George, the man that my mother had hired to take care of the flowers and such. I ran to him and told him what happened. The truck had turned and was heading the opposite direction, but George still took me inside, locked all the doors, and proceeded to call the police. As far as I know, they never found Joe. To George, if you're still out there, thank you for being there and acting as quick as you did. Thanks for listening to these creepy, allegedly true stories sent in by viewers just like you. If you have a story that you would like to share in a future video, whether it's a story with a creepy person, a creepy cryptid, or something entirely different, be sure to submit your story at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. I would love to share your story with everyone here in the swamp. If you enjoyed these stories, I would greatly appreciate it if you hit that like button, as it really helps me out. If you're new to the swamp, why not join us? Subscribe and turn on notifications to never miss a new video, as I upload them almost every single day, and all things natural and supernatural. I would love to know in the comments below, what story was your favorite tonight? Honestly, that last one kinda got me. There's something about being stalked by a pervert that really just strikes me the wrong way. You can download your favorite Swamp Dweller scary stories on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher Radio, and just about everywhere else you listen to podcasts on the internet. If you're not aware, I make music myself. It's not hip-hop or anything crazy like that, but I do make metal music, so if you're a fan of that, maybe check it out in the description down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Thank you guys, as always, for supporting the swamp the way you do. It's pretty crazy to see how many stories have been sent in recently. Gonna have a lot of very good videos for you guys soon. I'll see you guys soon with another creepy video.